Congressman Murphy, thanks for being here tonight. You represent our district on the Treasure Coast, and I don't have to tell you how horrible year it's been on our waterways. Toxic algae blooms, and despite the efforts that you've made for our estuary, both on the East Coast and the West Coast, the problem is persisting, and in some ways it's gotten a lot worse. Since the toxic algae blooms earlier this year, Senator Joe Negron, state senator, proposed buying 60,000 acres south of Lake Okeechobee to divert water from Lake Okeechobee. Do you support that proposal? And if so, how would you work in the Senate to make it happen?
Yes, well, as you know, I've been a huge proponent of doing anything we can to help send the water south. As you certainly know, I think we all know, the Army Corps of Engineers re-irrigated the Everglades. And there's been years and years of buildup and plenty of people to blame along the way, plenty of industry to blame along the way. But ultimately, if we are going to restore Mother Nature's flow south, we've got to start buying the land south of the lake and sending that water south. And while we've made some progress on C-44, on C-43, on SEP finally, on some estuary programs, on water farming, these are all small pieces of the pie. I've always been a firm believer that you have to add up all these pieces of the pie and you will see some changes. But in a year like this, in a year like 2013, my first summer, the lost summer in Congress, we saw that these small pieces aren't nearly enough, right? With the fish kills and the die-off and the algae blooms, that we've got to do a lot more. So buying that land south is critical. I think we can negotiate and have the conversation of which tracts of land are they contiguous. How do we make sure there's enough land there? I'm not going to pretend to be a scientist, but the experts I've spoken to have made it clear that you need quite a bit of mileage, quite a bit of acreage there of land to help filter that water as it moves south. And the way it's been historically is when that water leaves the lake, by the time it gets down to Biscayne Bay, it's pristine water you can basically drink, but it takes a certain amount of time to clean that. I'm a big proponent of Amendment 1 that passed with, 75% of Floridians supporting using that money to go toward land acquisitions and purchases. And unfortunately, the governor and folks in Tallahassee have squandered that money, spent just a near fraction of it. I believe the means and the method is there for exactly what Senator Negron's done, and I hope that we can have the leadership in Tallahassee to direct that money to buying the land, sending it south. There is, I think, at least one more opportunity to execute the deal that Charlie Crist made to purchase that land.
Yes or no follow-up. So if Senator Negron is successful in Tallahassee this year, will you work to secure the federal funding, which is typically 50-50, to match it? It's a $2.4 billion or so project.
Yes, I mean, look, the federal government has to live up to their end of the deal too. And there's been times since the SERP plan was passed, 16 years ago now, that federal government's done more and states government's gone back and forth. But both parties need to come together. And Martin County has been a real leader from the local county doing their part, putting their share of money in. But all three levels have to be working together. And the federal government certainly has to do a better job. Shouldn't be waiting years and years, 6 years, to pass a water bill with something like SEP in it that was supposed to be routine every 2 years. And I will certainly do my part advocating for that funding. But the basic premise is that the federal government, vis-a-vis Army Corps of Engineers, does a lot of the earthwork, the dirt. State does the land component, and they try to find the matching and the deal there. Anything we can do to make sure that this water is ultimately moving south is critical. And beyond just the impacts to our district and what's happening in the west coast of Florida with the Caloosahatchee and the discharges, there's a macro picture here too, and not to get too far off track, but this freshwater flow that historically used to flow south acted as a barrier to the saltwater intrusion. And in South Florida, it's limestone, it's a reef, it's a sponge. So that saltwater rising that we're seeing isn't just at the surface level, it's happening below our eyes. And there used to be a flow of fresh water south acting as a barrier. But now we're seeing our aquifers are being poisoned by the saltwater coming in quicker and quicker than ever expected. So there's a lot of components that to me show how important it is that we get this water to flow south to act as that barrier to prevent these discharges. And you talk about a contrast between my opponent and I on an issue. Just the other day in our debate, still wouldn't say the word climate change, right? It says humans have nothing to do with this. And things are changing everywhere in Florida, right? The reefs are dying in the Florida Keys. High tide, Miami Beach, there's salt water on the roads. Our district, these discharges everywhere you go. Miami was the #1 city listed by National Geographic to be impacted by climate change. He lives in Miami and he denies it. That to me is the epitome of what's wrong with Washington, D.C. when you have people that put their head in the sand on an issue of this importance.
I'd like to return to the issue of Lake Okeechobee and the discharges because it's been such a dire year on that front. But this time I want to talk about political influence and players. We did ask Senator Rubio earlier today about the large amount of contributions he's received to his campaigns and committees from the sugar industry. We've not seen that level of contribution to your campaigns. So the question is, what is your relationship with leaders in that industry, and how can we know you'll be an effective statesman to bring those players to the table, because they do need to be there?
Yeah, hey, I said it earlier, follow the money. Look, I've never taken money from the sugar industry, but as I've said from the beginning, I don't vilify them. I think there's many players at the table here, and I would much rather have sugar. I'd much rather have all of agriculture, to be honest, at the table with the Army Corps of Engineers, with the local and state government, to figure out a plan for how we solve this problem, because it's only getting worse. And you know, you look at Senator Rubio giving basically the exact same talking points that the sugar industry is giving. That's not the solution. Everyone's got to be at the table here. I'm going to continue to do what I think is best for the state of Florida, regardless of any thing else. You know, I made that pledge to my district before, and I think that's why I have one of the most independent voting records in the Congress. Is, you know, I don't put on blinders and go vote or just listen to one group or listen. I try to analyze every issue, and because of that, taken plenty of votes that some people in my party aren't happy with. But this is a great example of always standing up to do what I think is best for the environment, for the district, for the people of Florida. I'm going to continue doing that.
I'm going to challenge you to be concise on this answer.
Oh.
In one sentence, please identify what you see as the greatest opportunity for economic growth in Florida, and then point to one example of policy action you've taken to leverage it.
Yes. I think we have great opportunities with taking advantage of what we already have, and that's tourism and real estate, together. I think that is something we already have. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. We have it right there. How do you do that? How do you continue to grow? Number one, addressing climate change, accepting it's real, moving toward renewable energy so we protect those opportunities for the future. Making sure that real estate industry is vibrant. It is connected to, of course, our environment, but ensuring that we have, an economy that has some certainty, has some predictability.
Example of policy action?
Yeah, you do that by being bipartisan. Some of the legislation I've supported on the Financial Services, committee, I think helps find that compromise, helps find that balance where that small business, that entrepreneur, that 30-year-old with a great idea, has an opportunity through, the Small Business Committee, through a grant that I've supported, through legislation to help ease regulations on the community banks and the regional banks so they can give that loan, right, to that individual to grow.